Hey everyone, it's Brian. Just a quick show note before we begin today. When we were recording this season 3, we were still wrestling with what to call the small, formative communities we often refer to that are helpful and even necessary in our journey into deep discipleship. We've referred to them as immersive communities of formation, or ICFs, and 5-element communities. Down the road a bit, around episode 50, we finally just decided to call them greenhouses. That's the term that stuck, and if you go to our website, you'll find lots of information on greenhouses. So as you're listening today, you may hear some of those old terms, such as ICF and 5-element community. If you wouldn't mind, just mentally substitute the term greenhouse when you hear those older terms, and you'll be all set. Greenhouses are also covered in full in the Soil and Roots book, and you can find more information about that on the site or on Amazon. Thanks so much, and enjoy the episode. Hey there, and welcome to the Soil and Roots podcast, digging beneath the surface to uncover the hidden ideas that form us, the church, and our culture. I'm Brian Fisher.
And I'm Kyle Moody. This is episode 45, and we're heading back into the greenhouse to break down the last episode, which explored narcissism and its impact on Christian communities. But before we jump into the episode today, let's do a little review.
Soil and Roots has been around for a year now.
A year?
A year.
That is crazy. Happy birthday, SNR.
Happy birthday. And we've covered a lot of ground so far. As a reminder, the podcast is designed to be experienced in order. Not all of you are doing that. You can certainly start in the middle or listen to certain episodes if that's your thing, but you may not have the complete context of where Soil and Roots' journey is going if that's you.
And remember, season 1 was all about introducing us to the concept and power of ideas. An idea is an assumption, principle, or concept that is deeply rooted in our hearts, but we may not even be aware that it's there. As human beings, we're governed by any number of ideas about God, humanity, time, identity, our own stories, power, the gospel, the kingdom, our purpose, love. The list goes on and on. A courageously curious person digs into their hearts to uncover the ideas that actually govern and power us. And sometimes those ideas don't even align with our beliefs. We may think we believe something, but our hearts often tell a different story. A person of wisdom is someone who is consistently exploring their own heart and the heart of Jesus, and truly desires his ideas to become ours, all the way down to the roots and soil of who we are. Did you see what I did?
That was
roots
brilliant.
and soil.
Yeah, you said it backwards, but
on purpose, because I didn't want to be too obvious.
Yeah, stay on script, Kyle.
Okay, sorry.
And that's what season 2 primarily explored. Each of us has 8 indicators, things like our thoughts, our emotions, behaviors, how we treat time and money. Those things point us back to the hidden ideas and desires in our hearts. If we pay attention to these indicators and we explore them with God and some trusted friends, our journey to become more like Jesus often takes a few leaps forward. And near the end of season 2, we looked at what we've learned so far, and we boiled it down to what we now call the 3 primary problems that are facing the West. If discipleship means that our hearts are to become more like Jesus, we need to know him not only as Savior, but as Lord and King. But over the past few hundred years, the Western Church has largely forgotten the kingdom of God and its gospel. The good news that our King is right now reigning over the cosmos and making all things new. That the primary end for the Christian is not that we go to heaven, but that heaven is progressively coming to earth.
And if we aren't quite sure who we're supposed to become more like in our discipleship, this creates the discipleship dilemma. For example, the Western Church has largely forgotten that human beings are to rule and reign over the earth, over creation and culture on behalf of our Creator. We are integrated beings, ruling over an integrated world, and we are to rule for the goodness of mankind and creation.
And that leads to our third primary problem. We've explored the fact that in order for us to become more like someone else, our hearts require certain things. We call these the 5 key elements of formation. Now, all of you can say these from memory: time, habit, community, intimacy, and instruction. But because of different factors that we've explored, most Christians in the West aren't part of 5-element communities. And so most of us exist in a gap, the formation gap.
Season 3 has been exploring these 5 elements of formation. And we at Soil and Roots believe that a solution to the 3 primary problems is the recreation of specific formative communities. We call these immersive communities of formation, or ICFs.
ICF is a group of people who gather for the specific purpose of solving these 3 primary problems. We do that through teaching and living the kingdom, experiencing the heart of Jesus while we explore our own stories, and doing all this in a small, primary, committed group of others who are on the same journey. But let's face it, discipleship is often hard, and the process of exploring our hearts and the heart of Jesus can also be a struggle. In fact, can be painful. That's why a trusted small community is so important. And ICFs face many challenges as we grow together, but perhaps the most dangerous is the presence of a narcissist. A narcissist isn't vulnerable and typically can't be trusted. Because they're unable or unwilling to experience genuine empathy, a narcissist will comply with a group until it no longer suits them, in which case they may leave or they may begin to destroy the community from the inside out. Because narcissists are attracted to Christian communities, and there are so many of them in positions of Christian leadership, we just can't leave our exploration of this 3rd element of community without addressing this admittedly difficult topic. So Kyle, you and I have talked about this at length before, and you've listened to the episode. I'd love to hear some of your thoughts.
Yeah, well, and first, before we jump into it, I just want to thank you for being so candid and open with sharing your experiences on things that you've dealt with, because I think, as we dive into this, I think a lot of people are going to realize that they've dealt with, and you mentioned this in the episode, but I think a lot of people are going to realize that they've dealt with narcissists themselves. And one of the main things that we want to do is try to help people understand how to navigate these different kinds of challenging relationships with somebody that is bent toward that mindset. So my first thing that I would love to ask you is, why do you think that God presented these several different relationships with narcissists for you in particular? Like, what was his thinking? What was his plan behind all of this? I would love to hear your thoughts on what you've thought about, prayed about, discovered with him as you've been, looking back on these relationships and seeing what's been going on. I'd love to know your thoughts on why you think he presented several different ones throughout different time periods in your life.
Well, I've asked him the same question. I'm not sure I have a definitive answer. I mean, there's no doubt, I'm firmly implanted and middle-aged. There's no doubt that narcissism has been a consistent theme for much of my life, and that it took me a long time to sort of wake up and realize that pattern. And I don't know if that's like most people that have experienced narcissism. It seems to me as if it took me an extra long time to sort of realize that it was a pattern that I was susceptible to, and that I think I'm using the right word. I have historically been attracted to the love bombing techniques of narcissists, and I don't think I'm unique. I think most of us love to hang out with people who are really encouraging and affirming. And I hope it's that God would have me serve others and help others who have a desire to be in community, but either are currently suffering with a narcissist or have yet to kind of come around to what that means. I think like anybody else who has experienced some challenging times, and I think we all have experienced challenging times, the desire is to, in the appropriate context, share those experiences in order to help somebody. So I would hope that God has allowed me to have those experiences for the purpose of helping somebody out, and in my own life, just to become wiser, to become more relationally shrewd, to look at the way that Jesus relates to people and model that much better than I ever have, and to be, relationally careful while still being vulnerable. Because the challenge for anybody who's woken up from either a narcissist or any other type of predatory personality disorder is to say, well, I have a choice. I can either continue to be victimized, or I'm just going to shut down, right? And so the trick is to find that balance and to say, well, I don't need to be a victim any longer, But shutting down and cutting everybody off or shutting down my heart, that's not a loving Christian response either. So how do I find that middle ground to where I'm careful in my relationships but still willing to trust, still willing to hope, and that certainly has been the journey that I've been on. Sometimes I get it right and sometimes I don't.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and I think that it's very easy for us to, when we encounter something like this, is to kind of blame God and be like, "What? Why would you do something like this? Why would you?" And not in a inquisitive way, but in an accusatory way. I mean, I know I've done that. When something difficult or stressful has happened, it's more about like, "Well, what? Come on, why do I have to deal with this?" Instead of what I've started to learn, and what you were saying resonates with me, is that, okay, God, what are you up to? Because you're always up to something good. So what are you teaching me in this? Even though this is a very difficult, stressful, confusing situation, how are you drawing me closer to you through this? And looking back on my own experiences, I mean, I can see, oh, okay, this is what he was trying to teach me, or this is what he was trying to show me, or awaken me to, that I wasn't aware of. And of course, this is all much easier said than done, but I think it goes along with all this idea that we're talking about, how everything is integrated. God's in control of everything. It's not like when these bad things happen, he's like, whoop, that slipped by me. Didn't see that coming. I mean, no, he knows what's going on, and we can choose to push into that and say, okay, God, what are you up to? In an inquisitive kind of way. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. I think I would not be in a rush to try to sort through the lessons if you're in the middle of it or you've just come out of it. Because I realize in Western Christianity, everything's about teaching and lessons, and to me, the older I get, the more Christianity is about withness. So it's a word that means
Can
God
I get a
with
witness?
us. That was dumb.
Come on, I thought that
I'm
was
trying to be
pretty good.
serious here, and you're making bad puns. It's God with us. It's Emmanuel.
Yeah.
So yes, we're growing and we're learning, and God is teaching us. But having encountered narcissists, particularly in my professional life, numerous times, and more than once been very harmed, personally and professionally, by them. My immediate reaction, quite honestly, was not, "Oh Lord, what are you teaching me?"
Right,
I'm going to Psalm 13.
Yeah.
How long, O Lord, will you hide your face from me? How long will my enemies be exalted over me? Because a narcissist is your enemy. We can try to flower that up however we want to, but that's what they are. And so I think for somebody that has experienced narcissism and been damaged by a narcissist, the first step is to embrace God's withness, that he is with us in that relational suffering. And it's only now, after several years, that I'm looking back and saying, "Oh, well, what might God teach us?" I don't think we should rush into that. You're not suggesting that. I just don't think we should rush into trying to learn from it. I think the first order is allow God and stable, healthy people to just walk with us through the suffering, understanding the lessons they'll come in time.
Yeah, and that's what I meant. It wasn't about, oh, let me write down all the lessons or the things that I'm learning right now. It's more of, hey God, I just want to invite you into this space. I want you to be a part of this with me. It doesn't denigrate at all the trauma or the confusion or the anger that you're dealing with. It's not, because I understand what you're saying, that saying something like that, it could be misconstrued as, okay, well, this is great, so I'm just going to put on my happy face and I'm learning a good lesson here. No, I mean, that's not it at all. It's like you said, it's just an invitation to bring him in and be like, okay, God, I know you're up to something good, but I don't know what it is. I don't understand this. And I think he uses these as ways for us to draw closer to him and to the people around us. I mean, there's been so many things that have happened recently with me that he's very gently but very intentionally shown me, look, I don't want you to have to deal with this on your own. Yes, I'm with you, but I've surrounded you with people that are wanting to love on you and are wanting to be with you and wanting to link arms with you. And that's so amazing when we feel that and we see that in the midst of these events that are happening, and especially when we're dealing with somebody who is preying upon us or doing things to us that are unjustified, but for some reason in our minds we justify it. And you and I were talking about this, that when we encounter a narcissist like this, a lot of the time it is my immediate reaction is, well, it's my fault. I've done something wrong. I'm drinking their Kool-Aid. They're telling me what's going on, and I'm just going to buy it because I don't know it.
You mean when they start gaslighting or
Yeah,
accusing you?
because then, like you said in the previous episode, they're spinning this reality that is not necessarily true, but we're buying it. I'm buying it, and that's the thing that's really difficult about, like, how do we navigate that? I mean, and obviously you probably have to go through it in order to look back and see, oh, okay, but I mean, if we find ourselves in a situation where somebody is doing these things or saying these things, and we're like, what is this true? I mean, we're kind of thrown off a bit. What are some practical things that somebody could do to kind of navigate that initial interaction with somebody who they might not even know is a narcissist, or they might not even understand what's going on, but there's that little voice that's like, something's off here, or something's going on.
It's hard because a narcissist knows how to build trust really, really well, especially a covert narcissist. Most people don't really want to hang out with grandiose narcissists because they're sort of on the surface jerks. But a covert narcissist, they typically are brilliant manipulators, and they know how to endear themselves, and they know how to build trust. And so the friends of a covert narcissist legitimately love them and legitimately believe they're in a trusting relationship. So when a narcissist turns and begins the punishment phase, there is a genuine, oh my gosh, what did I do? That is from a place of legitimate humility and concern.
Yeah.
Because unless you know that you're dealing with a covert narcissist, it's like anybody else. If a trusted friend begins to accuse you and begins to condemn you and begins to tell you things about yourself that are hurtful, a trusting garden variety sinner is going to do the thing that we've been told for years Christians are supposed to do. In every criticism, there is a kernel of truth.
Right. Yeah.
We are to take the plank out of our own eye before we look at the speck in the other. You know what I mean? Like these verses begin to bubble up. Yeah. And so we're at a bit, candidly, we're at a bit of a disadvantage because we've rightfully been programmed to look at our own hearts when we're criticized, but we haven't been trained, I don't think, at all to say, well, hold on a second. Is the intent and the motivation and the character of the person accusing me aligning with the heart of Jesus? Mm-hmm. So we should be sharpening iron and we should be rebuking. I mean, those things are all biblical. But is the character of the person accusing me somebody that I should be taking a second look at? So in answer to your question, the first step, and again, I'm not a therapist or an expert on narcissism. I've studied it as a layperson, but is to say, well, I'm going to go gut check that accusation with others who are close to me. Mm-hmm. So, for example, I've been accused of lots of different things by narcissists over the years. I now know, well, I'm going to go to my wife. My sons are old enough now. I'm going to go to my sons. I'm going to go to great friends and say, hey, look, we don't have to go into the details, but this has been said about me. Have you seen this same pattern of behavior in my relationship with you? Yeah. And if my inner circle says, that's something that maybe we should talk about, then okay. But if my wife says, I have no idea what he's talking about, then I'm probably going to step back and say, maybe I need to look carefully at a pattern of behavior from that person before I start to drive myself into all these guilt and shame messages because of all the things that I've supposedly done. Yeah. It's extremely difficult because narcissists are brilliant manipulators, and if you're not one, and you're performance oriented, and many of us are, I'm a very competitive person. I like to win. I like to succeed. I like to accomplish things. They're the drug dealer and I'm the druggie. I mean, it's that sort of love bombing is deeply impactful for many people. and the turning point for a narcissist is very painful.
Yeah. And we were discussing this a little bit earlier, but I like the image that you put into my mind was when you're sitting there having this conversation, or you think that, man, what's going on? And you go back and you talk to these trusted people. But I love the image that you put in about, well, if Jesus were in the room with me, would he be saying this? Or would there be some truth to this? And again, that requires a whole lot of introspection. It requires a relationship with Jesus and knowing ourselves and knowing him. But I think that's a great place to go to as well with everything that you're talking about, which is excellent advice. But also to think, well, is this what Jesus would say about me? Or are these some things that I know that maybe I struggle with and I need to improve on? Or, man, this is just completely out of left field, and I might be dealing with somebody who is tainting the reality in order to fit the mold of whatever their agenda is.
Yeah, in preparation for the last episode, I actually watched the 1944
Gaslight
movie, yeah,
Oh.
which is a disturbing movie. It's worth watching. Ingrid Bergman plays the wife brilliantly. The challenge is that the narcissist will often use something that's truthful and expand on it or corrupt it or warp it. It's like when I said, way back in my 20s, when my boss, had his list of grievances against me, there were 4 or 5 things that walking away, I was like, oh, yep. Like I see it.
Yeah.
Like those are things that need to be corrected.
Yeah.
And a narcissist will often use some of those things as a kernel of truth, but then manipulate it or grow it. And in the movie, you see her husband do that any number of times. Will take something that has a hint of truth to it, but corrupt it and warp it, and that's what causes so much confusion. That's where it's essential to have, long-term trusted relationships with people who genuinely seek your goodness, and that's been proven time and time again, to be able to step in and say, well, this sounds like a legitimate criticism. This over here sounds, kind of wacky, and we need to evaluate it. But I would encourage our listeners to go watch the movie, because it actually presents a chilling and compelling example of how narcissists take things that are true and corrupt them in order to create that doubt in the mind of their victim.
Yeah. And you mentioned this a little bit earlier, but do you think that a lot of people are susceptible? Let's say a lot of believers are susceptible to people like this because we've been sort of trained to look at our own faults and, we're sinners, we're fallen, we're broken.
Yeah.
So when somebody tells you something, it's probably true. And again, there's nothing wrong with that teaching and that doctrine, but at the same time, we've got to find a balance, because when you were sharing that story, I was thinking of something that was very similar that happened to me several years ago. And I was in a situation where I had a boss who pulled me in and told me all of this stuff, and I was dumbfounded, but at the same time I was like, oh well, it's got to be, this has got to be true, because there were some things. Yeah, there were some things that were said that I was like, okay, well, yeah, I did that, or yeah, I didn't do that. And then I was just, it took me a good year and a half just to unravel all of the things that I was going through, or that I misconstrued and I took as truth. And again, at the beginning of this, when I said that, we can use these as opportunities, looking back on it, I see that Jesus was right there with me, even though I didn't understand what was happening, and but he very gently showed me the things about myself that I needed to work on, kind of like what we were just talking about with, you are a prized possession, you are a work of art. And I never really understood that, and I never believed that, and I never bought that. I was like, yeah, okay, I'm redeemed and God loves me and all that, but that was so foreign to me for me to actually think I am an heir in his kingdom. That whole situation that happened with me several years ago brought into laser focus, and it took me down a path that was very dark and was very troubling, but at the same time, it was so beautiful, and it was so empowering, and it brought me so much closer to Jesus. And I think that when these things happen, I mean, we would love to be able to help people navigate those situations without it being so overwhelming and so detrimental and so debilitating, because it can be very damaging. And if you don't understand what's going on, and if you can't see it for what it is, then I mean, it can drive you way away from Jesus, and
It can drive you insane.
Yeah, and it can turn him into the villain when actually he's the one that's trying to shepherd you through something like that.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of good stuff in your comment. I think it's difficult to see Jesus in the middle of the situations. It certainly was for me in the times that I've been through it. It usually takes substantial time. It usually takes substantial counsel from people that actually have your back to sort of unwind, because your perception of yourself gets so corrupted and so warped, and it takes a while to kind of come out of that and get back to a place of being centered in who you are in Christ. So yes, he's there, and yes, he's teaching us, but to be perfectly candid, in the middle of it, that's not always, at least for me, it wasn't forefront of my mind, and I certainly didn't feel like he was there in the midst of it. So again, I think this is where community is so essential. Having people around you who are there for your goodness. There is a legitimate purpose in the Christian life for discipline and rebuke. So Hebrews 12:11, all discipline for the moment seems not to be joyful but sorrowful, yet to those who have been trained by it afterwards it yields the peaceful fruit of righteousness. And that's the difference. If somebody is rebuking you or correcting you for your goodness, then that's somebody who is loving you in Christian love. If somebody is rebuking you and criticizing you, and you sort of realize this isn't really about me, this is about them, then that's a very different situation. I think that narcissism is a plague in the Western church. My guess is it's far more insidious and present than what most of us would like to admit. And I think it's probably going to increase, because this is a well-studied field, but there's more unknowns than knowns. But if we would accept that a contributing factor to a heart developing into a narcissistic heart is emotional or spiritual or physical abandonment or abuse in the early stages of life, well, those incidences are only increasing. So the byproduct of that, of broken families and abandonment, if that's only going up, then we would probably expect to see more folks that are struggling with such deep insecurities and heart wounds that, they end up becoming harmful. So the Christian church really should spend quite a bit of time studying and understanding narcissism and other personality disorders, and being equipped to be able to still love those people and to forgive them and to understand relationally what healthy, loving interaction should look like, which includes sometimes not being in a relationship at all.
Right. Yeah.
So it's complicated. There's a lot to it.
Yeah. And something else that I was thinking about when I was listening to the episode. So let's play out a scenario here where you discover that there is somebody who has narcissistic tendencies in your ICF, in your group. And I guess there's a couple of parts to this, but the first thing
you gotta take them one at a time, because I'm not smart enough to keep up with multiple questions.
Okay, well, no, I'm not. I can't hold them in my brain either.
One at a
so I'll
time.
say one,
Okay, great.
and then I'll probably forget what the other one was.
That's
now that
perfect.
We've been talking
That'll
about
save me the energy of having to answer the second question.
So the first thing was, and now I'm struggling to remember what I was even saying.
That was my point.
Yeah,
I've just manipulated you successfully.
Oh man,
See how that
well
works?
done, sir.
Thank
Well
you.
done.
I'm well trained.
Walked right into that one. So let's going back to, you have a narcissist in the group. What would be some practical, realistic things that the group could do to just start the conversation with that? And is it, and I guess the second part of it, and I'm going to do it anyway, even though you
Oh
said
my
not to, I'm
gosh.
going to throw it at you. Is there a chance, I mean, obviously anything's possible with God, but with a true narcissist, do you think that they will be redeemed in that situation? Or like you said in the episode, it's just kind of like, well, sometimes it has to be, we've got to separate ourselves and then maybe they eventually come back or they realize what happened and they rejoin or they, whatever. Do you think, and again, these are hypotheticals, but I just think it's interesting to talk about because I'm sure that there might be groups that encounter something like this. And
There will be.
yeah. And so how can we prepare ourselves for that and what it looks like? And obviously, you wrap it all up in prayer and you ask the Holy Spirit and all of that. But at the same time, I'm curious as to your thoughts on if that is possible for a true narcissist to be redeemed within the group without leaving. I mean, let's just start there. Let's do that first. So,
Well, in my experience, I have not personally seen that. However, in reading, the two good books on this are Jim Wilder's The Pandora Problem and Kurt Thompson's The Soul of Desire. And in Thompson's book, he deals with kind of personality disorder and addictions in a general way. But they come to similar conclusions. And they give anecdotes and statistical evidence that suggest that yes, I mean, a narcissist's heart can be reconnected, if you will,
yeah,
to where the deep insecurities or brain chemistry, whatever's going on there, can be healed, certainly through the spirit, but through the community itself. But as we talked about in the episode, it isn't through telling a narcissist that they're a narcissist.
right.
It's through the group methodically and consistently and relationally showing what healthy shame and confession and attachment look like over time to where the narcissist's heart begins to change through experience, not through instruction.
Right.
And this is where, in Western Christianity, we instruct the heck out of each other, thinking that that's universally, the secret to heart transfer. Well, we just have to tell them.
Right.
Well, the human heart's far more complex than that. So this is where, those resources and others that I've read are very clear. This involves training. The group has to be trained. The group has to learn to recognize narcissism. The group has to be okay with negative treatment and pushback and some odd behavior. And the general sense that I get from those resources is the narcissist's heart will either soften and change through watching and experiencing transparent, loving, vulnerable relationships, or they'll just become uncomfortable and leave.
Yeah.
So the answer is yes. Through the spirit, that community can be effective. I have not personally experienced it, but truthfully, I spent most of my life being rather naive and uneducated and untrained, so I'm not the best source for success stories there.
Right. Now, when you mentioned training for an ICF, I mean, and this might be a conversation for another episode, but I was just curious. Do you have something specific in mind, or were you just kind of thinking that they would need to be versed in like reading those books?
Yeah.
And okay, so that's what you meant by
There's probably other resources.
Yeah.
I think as Soil and Roots grows, we'll hunt those down. But
Yeah.
certainly those two books would be great places to start. And they would be valid for anybody that's in a relationship with a narcissist.
Yeah.
Not just for a community. But the general sense is do not confront them directly because it just feeds them and will have the opposite effect. It's an aspect of showing them, and over time their heart is either going to begin to melt, or the hardness of their heart is going to come out in other ways, and they'll eventually take off, or they'll have to be asked to leave.
Yeah.
It's tough. I'm not sure that that's for the faint of heart, excuse the pun, but if we're going to love narcissists, and God calls us to do that in a community, then I think there's a sense of, how vulnerable and transparent can we be as we love them and attempt to love them into the kingdom, instead of necessarily instructing them into the kingdom.
Well, yeah, and I mean, we're all about integration. We're all about acknowledging that God is sovereign over everything. I mean, there's a very good possibility, and I'm thinking that, like you said, it will happen, that God will bring narcissists to these groups in order for them to get the healing and the restoration that he wants for them to have. And, that's one of the cool, very difficult and challenging things about being in groups like this, is that you can help people like that, and you can give them the love and the support and the challenge that they sometimes didn't even know they need.
Well, they don't know they need it, and they wouldn't accept the fact that they need it even if they knew about it. I think the other thing to be careful of is because narcissists so often gravitate towards positions of leadership in Christian communities, that there has to be a strong recognition and cognizance of that. So if 30 to 90% of all the pastors in America are narcissists, and that's an incredibly wide range, but let's just say it's 50%, that 1 out of every 2 pastors struggles with narcissistic traits or has narcissistic traits, then we would also have to say, well, we're just going to have to be cognizant of the fact that even in ICFs, which are going to require some measure of leadership, that a narcissist might gravitate towards that sort of position in order to have power. Of course, leading an ICF is not about power; it's about serving. So that's where even the group itself may have to be cognizant of that. And look, the trick is it can take years to identify the types of traits that narcissists have. I mean, these are not, especially coverts. It's not easy. I wish there was some manual.
Right.
But until a narcissist, in case of a covert narcissist, until they turn and they begin to punish you, it can be near impossible to realize that what's going on, because the narcissists that I've interacted with, and again, all of them have professed to be Christians, they're going to pray beautifully, they're going to lead devotions, they're going to publicly evangelize. I mean, they know the walk and what to say and how to act in order to ingratiate themselves with others, and yet they are enemies. They're enemies.
Yeah. And you said, this was a question that I wrote down, but I'm not sure if we actually touched on it, but do narcissists know that they are narcissists?
My understanding is no, and they would be offended at the idea that they are.
Which
again,
makes it... Oh, sorry.
A clinically diagnosable narcissist is unable to experience legitimate empathy and is unable to accept anything that may make them look bad. So now in the Christian world, we rejoice in confession.
Right.
Meaning not that we confess and we rejoice in sinning, but confession is a liberating, joyful experience. When I express my weakness or my sin to you, that is an expression of God's grace and God and Christ's strength in me, and we rejoice in that. That, at the heart level, is foreign and scary and dangerous and completely untenable for a narcissist. So the joke is that, the best way to determine that you're not a narcissist is to ask the question, am I a narcissist? Because a narcissist wouldn't even think to ask that question. They would think it's silly because their brain and their heart wouldn't even register.
Yeah.
So now that's different between that and somebody who has narcissistic traits. I think somebody can struggle with that and realize that they deal with arrogance, or they deal with a deep sense of shame or abandonment issues, and be somewhat cognizant of that and want to change, versus the idea of a full-fledged narcissist is someone who actually they don't have the capability to make those connections.
Yeah.
That's what makes them so dangerous.
It's really difficult to deal with that kind of treatment and that kind of behavior, and I don't know what I would have done in that situation without my wife. I mean, the first thing that, and I'm getting emotional just thinking about it, and this was a year and a half ago, almost 2 years ago. The first thing that happened when I told her about it was, and it ended up being a job switch. I mean, I had to leave the position that I was in, and I was kind of forced out. And the first thing she did was, you know what, we're going to celebrate. Because God's up to something, and he's moving you on to something else. And I don't know what I would have done without her. And I mean, it's just, but I see that as an extension of Christ. I see that as an extension of Jesus. And he put these people in my life that were able, and I'm sure that you can attest to this too, like your beautiful wife that was able to help you and help you walk through this, but that's an extension of Jesus. And that's one of the things that is just so incredibly amazing about what we're trying to do here at Soil and Roots. I mean, this is what drew my heart to it, was to help people understand the overwhelming, awesome, limitless love of Jesus and what he does and how he does it through his creation, through his people, through his word. I mean, all of these things that just, again, like you said, the integration of all of it is just so beautiful and so amazing. And it's, yes, we're dealt with a lot of difficult things and we have to go through a lot of challenging things, but he's right here with us and he's walking through it with us. And he wants us to know how much he loves us. And he shows that love to us every single day. And it's hard sometimes to see it, but it's always there.
Yeah, I seriously doubt I would be having this conversation with you if it weren't for my wife, because this is a path we've walked more than once and have experienced extraordinary destruction as a result of some of the folks that we've encountered. And at the same time, there is a fellowship in suffering. So this is very unchristian-like in the West, but the closer that we grow to Jesus, the more that we sort of live his story, and his story has quite a bit of suffering. So you've been the victim of a narcissist, you and your family. Our family has been the victim of more than one. We are better prepared. We're acquainted with suffering in that way. We haven't suffered in lots of ways, but that's a way that we have suffered. And that does draw us closer to Christ because he is a man of suffering. And at the same time, we are better equipped. And I, for one, am absolutely far more empathetic and compassionate and understanding of people that are suffering with narcissists or have suffered with narcissists than I was before, because I've been through it. Yeah. Now, does that mean I ever want to go through it again? No, I don't ever want to experience what we've experienced.
No.
If God takes us through it, I trust I'll be better prepared and far less naive. At the same time, my heart is bigger and my capacity for compassion is bigger. And truthfully, that extends to the narcissist. As much as I have had enemies, and I have, and there are people that have legitimately wanted to seek to harm us, and they have. If a qualification of a Christian, if the mark of a maturing Christian is the ability to love our enemies, then even getting to the point where we can pray for them, where we can think of them without wanting immediate justice in the form of lightning bolts, is a step forward and is a sign of God's grace working and sanctifying us in our lives. So again, we have this dichotomy between the role of suffering in our lives and the reality, the tough reality that suffering, in fact, is allows us to experience a greater love for others, including those that would seek to harm us. Now, that doesn't mean that we're best friends. I'm not saying that at all. The vast majority of narcissists that have been in my life, I have no relationship with, and I think that's the best way that I can love them. But to not wish them ill will, to pray God's blessings for them, that's a good marker to get to in time, and it takes a lot of time and a great community to get there. But I think that's a sign of Jesus' sanctifying work in our hearts.
Yeah, and again, like you said, it's that dichotomy of suffering, but it leads to strength. And in my weakness, I am strong. I mean, I'm going to drop some Star Wars on you, and I'm going to drop another TV show on you. But I was watching The Mandalorian, and the armorer was talking to Grogu about fashioning the Beskar armor. And then it made me think about what she was saying to him, made me think about there's another great show called Forged in Fire. It's not on anymore, but it was an amazing show. It's just about these knife smiths who take this raw metal, these all different kinds of metal, and turn them into beautiful swords or axes or knives or whatever. But that is what I was thinking of when you were talking just now about how Jesus takes us through these things that are so incredibly difficult and so incredibly seemingly damaging to us. And at the time they are damaging.
Yep.
But he uses that to make us stronger. Just like you beat the heck out of this iron and this metal and you put it in under intense heat, and it's just, and then you quench it, and then it's just, and sometimes there's cracks and imperfections you got to file out. There's all these things you have to do, but at the end you've got this amazing piece of steel that has a purpose that it didn't have before. And that's just the beautiful thing about this, is that God is the perfect smith when it comes to stuff like this. And he knows exactly where our thresholds are, and he won't take us above that, and he'll take us right to it. And we think, I can't deal with this. I can't. There's the old saying of, well, I can deal with anything with Jesus. And I mean, the truth is that he takes me to where he knows that I can go. And it's beyond a lot of times what I think my limitations are. He'll take me ahead of that because he knows he created me. He created us. And he knows that, yeah, this is stretching you, but the results and the aftermath of this is going to make you so much stronger. And you'll be able, like you said, you'll be so much more discerning, so much more wise, so much more empathetic to people, the other people that I know that are suffering, or the other people that I know that are struggling with something like this. You will be such a powerful witness to them. And that's the thing that then you start looking forward. I mean, again, I do not want to say this in a flippant sort of way, but when you get those trials or when you get those struggles, you start thinking, okay, God, all right, we're going through it again. Let's do it. And again, it doesn't make it any easier. It doesn't mean that you're just okay, but there's that thought there of, okay, God, you're with me. I know you're doing this for a reason, and we're going to battle through this together, and I'm going to be stronger because of it. And it's hard to do, but once you've gone through it several times, then you start building that trust, and you understand that Jesus is right there with you, and he's using it for your good and then ultimately for his glory.
Yeah, and I think the witness for me, has been the pivotal piece, because when you're in the midst of that sort of a trial and you pull out James 1, consider it all joy, my brother, and when you encounter I'm like, screw you.
Right.
I'm not joyful in the least at this trial. And yet it promises that through our trials and sufferings we'll have endurance. For me, experiencing Jesus in those moments brings the hope. And really, is that not what we're talking about? The core underlying idea is that when we are preyed upon or betrayed or abandoned or used and exploited by humans, we still have hope that not only Christ is with us, which is what for me has been the sustaining element, but the hope that whether I know the reason or not, God is still going to use that for something good. Now, to be candid, I don't know in some of the circumstances I've been in how that's all supposed to work out, and I couldn't tell you, when this happened, it turned into this. I don't know, and I'm not sure we're granted that in this life. But I think his witness, his presence, and experiencing him and understanding that he has been through it to an infinitely larger degree than we are, and he suffers with us, that he's just there with us. And that comfort and that experience is, for me, what has sustained me probably more than, at some point he's going to turn this for good. In the middle of that suffering, I have personally, and it's probably immaturity on my part, I don't find that to be as appealing as just the fact that he's there. And the fact that he's there is enough most days.
Yeah.
And in the future, as we look back, sometimes we sort of understand how that hope manifests itself. But, that's the hope of the Christian life, that the stuff we go through, the pain we inflict on others, unfortunately, and the pain that's inflicted on us, all in his grand design, he's with us in it, and he suffers with us in it. And at the same time, he's still miraculously using it for his good. I think this plays really well into the next section, because we're about to move into intimacy, which is the fourth element. And we're not going to spend a ton of time on it. We're only going to spend a few weeks on it compared to all the amount of time we spend on community. But the third element of intimacy, you have vulnerability, you have trust built into that. In these ICF communities, we are intentionally seeking to cultivate relationships that are vulnerable and confessional and transparent. And there has to be a hope in that sort of community is going to result in good. Even though it's going to be bumpy, even though there might be a narcissist in there, even though there's going to be some tough moments and some hurt feelings, there's no way to get around it. But as we now turn our attention towards what does it mean to be in a community that is intimate, that is vulnerable, that is trusting, I think this is a good parlay because, in any ICF, every member is going to come in with a story. Every person is going to come in with wounds and hurts. And many of them aren't aware of those, and many of us are not going to be in a position to share them or want to share them, certainly up front. But a community that is willing to accept that and move forward with that, to me, is very, very special. And, in the times of my life where God has graced me with friends or communities where there has been that level of intimacy and transparency, that to me has been more formative than just about anything else. Hey, thanks for tuning in and listening. This is a tough topic. Glad that you stay with us. If you're in a relationship with a narcissist or have been wounded by one, we both get it. And you certainly have our prayers and certainly are asking God that he would be with you during this time and guide you appropriately as you wrestle with what is a very difficult personality disorder and a very harmful person and at times even enemy.
Yeah, we'd love to pray for you too. If you feel comfortable with, just sharing, hey, I'm struggling with this, we'd love to pray for you.
Because you can email us.
Yes. Where can they email us, Brian?
At fish@soilandroots.org. Hey, also, if you want more information, you can check us out at the website, which is soilandroots.org. We obviously would love to pray for you. You can email that request into fish@soilandroots.org. And you can still follow our little Facebook community. Just search for Soil and Roots Podcast on Facebook if that's your thing. Thanks for being with us, and we'll see you next time.